You are employed in the state of New York, and you believe you're not being paid the wages you were promised. You believe that you were not paid minimum wage. You're a tipped employee, and you never signed any documents to allow yourself to be part of a tip pool. You were onboarded, and you never signed any introductory documents. You didn't get time and a half for overtime. You're in the service industry. You work more than 10 hours. You didn't receive 1 hour of minimum wage for that shift. These are all violations of New York's wage and hour laws. New York's wage and hour laws over the last 10 years have become a thicket of litigation. And in many ways, this is because the rights of the employees and the regulations placed on the employers have greatly increased in the last decade or so. I remember when I started my first job, I made $4.25 an hour, and I clocked in and clocked out. And essentially, those were the rules. That was it. You got time and a half if you work more than 40 hours a week. You got a 30-minute lunch, paid or not paid, up to the employer. Things have changed a lot since the 1990s. Uh, Things you need to be aware of was when you started the job, did you sign a wage notice sheet? And it's a statutory form. The employer has to give it to you. It states what your wage is. If the employer doesn't give you that form, you're entitled to a liquidated damage amount up to $5,000 for each day that form is not given to you. Second thing, are you paid cash? Not illegal to pay somebody cash. And heck, maybe a lot of us would like to be paid cash because, who knows? But here's the flip side of that. The flip side is you're paid cash. You probably didn't get with your cash payment. You didn't get a wage statement. And again, that's a violation of New York labor law. An employer is liable for a sum of money up to $5,000 for the failure to give a wage statement. So those two penalties, even on themselves, if you work at an employer long enough, 6 months or more, it equals $10,000. That's $10,000 in penalties. We haven't even discussed whether or not you were paid time and a half. Minimum wage in New York, it's a lot more than the federal wage. The federal wage is $7.25 an hour. It's been that rate for the last 20 years. The minimum wage in New York, as of the time we're shooting this video, depends on where in the state you're located. In New York City and Long Island, it's north of $16 an hour. Rest of the state, it's a little less than $16 an hour. Are you being paid minimum wage? Those are issues to be aware of. A lot of you may not be being paid minimum wage. And another thing, I've seen a lot of in my time doing this is where you pay time and a half for work over 40 hours. A lot of employers will pay you biweekly. Here's something I've seen. So biweekly, you may have worked, let's say 80 hours, right? So it seems like, okay, 80 hours times whatever the wage is the amount of money that should be given to you, less deductions. Well, let's say in week one you work 50 hours, and week two you work 30 hours. Well, guess what? For those 50 hours, you're entitled to straight time for the first 50, and you're entitled to premium time or time and a half for the next 10. The failure of the employer to give you that time and a half for those 10 hours, that's a violation. That could be, that is a big issue. There's issues regarding tip minimum wage, which generally is less than standard minimum wage. But were you a signatory to a tip pool? Was the terms and conditions of the tip pool given to you? Larger employer, probably. Smaller employer, not. That has huge ramifications. If a tip pool regulation is not adhered to, you as an employer are entitled to the non-tip standard minimum wage without any credit given for tips. And that, over a long enough time span, is a very large punitive issue that your employer could face should you wish to enforce your rights. Now, I want to now talk about the spread of hours. You work in the service sector. You had a very long shift. You were working 12, 13, 14 hours. You covered a double. Well, guess what you're entitled to under New York law, which I don't know of any other law or any other state that does this. You get an extra hour of minimum wage called spread of hour pay. Where you paid that, you know. Those are the common violations we see under New York law. And how do you redress these issues? You could seek guidance, or you can file it with the Department of Labor. They may investigate, they may not investigate, or you can seek counsel through my law firm, for instance, and we will promptly bring an action. And these cases, especially these cases, they generally resolve themselves very quickly, because a couple punitive issues that exist is that besides giving you the difference between what you were paid and what you were owed under New York law and federal law too, your attorney gets attorney fees paid for by the other side. So that means if litigation is commenced and a trial were to go forward, upon you prevailing in court, your attorney is entitled to their fees paid for by the other side. Generally, these issues are resolved through a retainer agreement, and a settlement normally occurs where, again, these issues are handled, but that's the law. You're also entitled to what's called 100% liquidated damages. This was something that occurred over the last 10 or 12 years when New York amended its labor law. It stated that upon a violation, you get liquidated damages equal to what you were shortchanged or what you're supposed to be paid. Again, another very harsh outcome for an employer that doesn't follow the rules. And lastly, another issue that exists is prejudgment interest. In New York, judgment rate interest is 9% per annum. There are certain exceptions where the rate is higher. Workers' compensation judgments, no fault rate judgments, they generally come with a higher prejudgment interest rate and post-judgment interest rate, but generally it's 9%. In the realm of wage and hour litigation, you are entitled to 9% from the midpoint of when your damages accrued. Now, don't forget, in New York, you have 6 years to bring a unpaid or underpaid wage claim. It's a lot of years. And so that 9% interest accrues from the midpoint of when your claim arose. So again, it's another, very large penalty to an employer that decides to violate the law, whether willfully or not. So these are things you need to be aware of when you are considering whether or not you've been treated fairly by your employer. And I hope you find this information useful. Thank you.